The wind had no mercy that morning. It came down off the hills like something wild and half-starved, tearing across the plain with a bitter edge that carried dust-brittle grass and the scent of something scorched. In the distance, smoke rose in a straight black column, thin and sharp as a needle. It could have been a brush fire or a stove burning wrong or just another house falling down under the weight of winter. But no one paid it much mind out here. She stood at the edge of the yard, what passed for one boot sunk into cracked dirt. Her skirts clung to her legs where the frost had turned them stiff. Behind her, the wagon leaned hard to one side, axle cracked, wheel gone to splinters somewhere miles back. What was left of her family huddled beneath the tarp, 3 children too quiet for their age, one coughing soft and steady like a metronome keeping time. Her hands were raw, not from cold, but from holding too tightly to everything she hadn't been able to carry. Her jaw ached from keeping it set. She had not cried since her husband's body was lowered into the earth, back in Kansas, the ground too wet to take him easily. His name wasn't even carved on the cross. There hadn't been time or money, just wood, dirt, and silence. Now she looked out at the long stretch of the ranch. Miles of broken fence, a barn with its ribs showing the house like a man slouched in grief. But there was work. She had heard it at a depot 2 towns back. Whitley Ranch took on hands in the cold months. Calves were lost to the freeze if the fires weren't tended. Maybe the owner had a soft streak, or maybe he just didn't ask too many questions if the job got done. Her fingers closed over the scrap of paper in her coat pocket. A name, a road directions written in a hurried, smudged hand. That was all she had now. Behind her, the smallest child whimpered. She didn't turn. If she did, the whole of her might collapse. The front door of the house opened. A man stepped out, tall and square in the shoulders. Not young. Not old. His hat was low, but she could see the hard lines of his face, the way his coat moved like it had seen too many winters. He didn't speak, just looked at her for a long moment, then looked past her to the wagon. She didn't offer words. She didn't plead. After a while, he stepped down from the porch. His boots were heavy. The sound of them was the only thing alive in the cold. When he got close enough, she lifted her chin. The wind lifted her hair in pale, tangled strands. Her eyes were red at the corners. "I heard you need hands," she said. He nodded once. "You bring your own tools." She shook her head. "Just my arms." His gaze flicked to the wagon again. To the children. The smallest had crawled forward and was staring back at him through the folds of the tarp, thumb in his mouth, face smudged with road dust. "Only asking for work," she said, quiet now. He studied her face. Whatever he was thinking didn't show, not fully. But something shifted in him. A breath drawn slower than the one before. He turned and walked toward the barn. "Stove's hot inside," he called over his shoulder. "Let them warm up." She hesitated, just for a second. Then she gathered them, her children, her breath, her bones, and followed. The floor creaked under her boots. The warmth hit like a wave and brought tears she didn't want. The man stood at the hearth, adding wood with the kind of care that didn't match the size of his hands. She stood near the door. The children drifted forward, silent and watchful, drawn to heat like moths. He looked at them, not with pity, not like they were trouble, just saw them. "I'll show you the pens after," he said. She nodded. He looked back at the fire. "That one there," he said, meaning the middle child, "looks like he's hungry enough to eat a whole calf." A small smile cracked the boy's face. Just for a second. The man didn't smile back, but something in his voice had softened. The pens were rough and smelled of manure and rusted wire. Frost clung to the fence posts like white moss, and each breath came out in clouds. She pulled her coat tighter and followed him, boots crunching over frozen mud. He didn't speak much, just pointed. "There's the feed shed, the calf shelter, the pump that needed priming." The wind whistled low through the slats of the fence like some slow, tuneless fiddle. He handed her gloves that didn't quite fit, and she didn't thank him, not out loud. She just pulled them on and got to work. By noon her arms ached and her breath burned, but she didn't stop. She dug out the troughs, cleared the ice-hauled buckets from the well. Her fingers bled where the seams of the gloves split, but she didn't mention it. He watched quiet, never stepping in, never stopping her. Once, when she dropped a pail and had to chase it down a slope, he chuckled low under his breath. Just once. She wasn't used to this kind of cold. In Kansas, the wind was wide and aimless. Out here, it was mean, like it had purpose. Still, it kept her alert. The pain in her arms was real, and for the first time in months she welcomed something she could fight back against. When the sun leaned west and the sky turned to amber and rust, he called it for the day. They stood at the edge of the fence, both breathing hard steam rising from their mouths. "You worked more than most men I've hired," he said, not looking at her. She didn't answer. He scratched his chin, glanced back toward the house. "You'll stay in the bunkhouse for now. It's got heat. I'll bring blankets." She hesitated. "My children. They can sleep in the house." She blinked. He met her eyes. "I'm not asking to raise 'em. Just not leaving 'em to freeze." She nodded. That was all. They didn't say more. That night in the bunkhouse, the walls creaked with wind. She sat on the cot, hands open, on her lap, blood crusted at her knuckles. The lamp cast shadows like hands on the walls. She could hear her children's muffled laughter through the crack under the door. Someone he had given them stew. She hadn't tasted meat in weeks. She let her head fall forward, hair slipping over her cheeks. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from something else, something harder to name. The sound of them laughing made her ache. It made her remember. Back when her husband was still alive and they had a garden, tomatoes so red they looked painted. He'd sung to the youngest off key, and she'd laughed and told him to hush before he summoned rain. That house had burned down after he died. She didn't cry then, either, only held the children and walked away. Outside boots crunched against frost. She sat up straighter. The door opened. He stepped in, holding a bundle of blankets. "Fire in here's weak," he said. "You'll need these." She took them. "Thank you." He looked around, then motioned to the small, rickety table near the window. "There's coffee in the house. I'll bring some tomorrow." She nodded. He didn't leave right away. Just stood there a moment, hat in his hands. "You got a name?" he asked. "Clara." He nodded. "I'm Eli." She didn't smile, but she said all right. He left without another word. The wind picked up. It howled around the corners of the bunkhouse, and still she felt warm. In the dark beneath the blankets, her fingers brushed over her palms. Raw and split. Proof she still had something to give. If this journey mattered, subscribe and continue. The days came hard and early. Clara rose before the light, before even the cattle stirred. She moved quiet through the cold, the same cold that found the soft places in her coat and clung to her bone. The bunkhouse creaked as she stepped outside, sky still a heavy blue-black, stars fading like the last breath of a dream. She made her way to the barn where the lantern still burned and the cows lowed uneasy from the dark. Eli was already there. Sleeves rolled, steam rising off his breath as he shoveled grain. He gave her a nod. That was all. They worked side by side, not speaking much but falling into rhythm. There was a kind of comfort in the silence. She mucked out stalls, threw hay, learned the gaits that stuck and the ones that bit fingers if you weren't careful. He showed her how to carry a calf across the pen, how to check hooves for frostbite. His hands were rough but not cruel. He never once asked about her husband. Never asked how long she'd been on the road. By the end of the week, her body ached in places she hadn't known could ache. But there was something else growing in her too, something stubborn and steady. Her grip had strengthened. Her back no longer bent so easy. And at night when she sat by the stove with the children wrapped in quilts, the sound of their breathing filled her with something sharp and bright. Eli came by each night. Not for long. Just to check they had what they needed, sometimes with a tin of coffee, sometimes jerky wrapped in cloth. He never stayed. Just knocked, stepped in, and left what he brought. Clara watched him go, each time something soft and wary blooming behind her ribs. One evening after supper he lingered longer. "You fixed that south gate," he said. "Better than I could." She wiped her hands on her apron. "My pa ran a smithy. Taught me some." He looked down at his boots. "You miss it, that life?" She shrugged. "It's gone." He nodded like he understood. And maybe he did. He rubbed the back of his neck, cleared his throat. "I buried my brother last spring," he said. "Never took to the ranch like I did. Wanted to paint. Traveled east. Got sick." She said nothing. Just listened. Ellie didn't look at her. Just stared at the flames in the stove like they were telling the story for him. "Sent me a canvas once. Just blue. Nothing else. I didn't get it." She thought of her own dead and the things left unsaid. How silence became a kind of language after a while. She wanted to ask what he'd done with the painting, but she didn't. Instead, she said, "My middle boy hums when he sleeps. Like a cricket. Drove my husband mad." Eli smiled just barely. "He still does." She looked up at him. The warmth between them was fragile, quiet, like snow beginning to fall. Not enough to cover the ground, not yet, but maybe someday. Later that night, when she stepped outside for air, she found the wind had settled. The moon hung low and the stars were clean and bright. She closed her eyes and breathed deep. Smoke horses, pine sap. No ash. No fear. Just cold and life and a sky big enough to hold it all. She turned back toward the house, and through the window she saw Eli in the kitchen with her youngest on his hip, pouring milk into a tin cup. The boy laughed, spilled it, and Eli didn't flinch. Just wiped it with his sleeve and handed the cup back. Clara pressed her palm to her chest, not to steady herself, just to feel it, whatever it was. The warmth, the ache, the beginning of something she hadn't let herself imagine in a long time. March brought thaw, but not kindness. The snow pulled back from the hills, leaving behind muck and rot, the ground soaked and sullen. Fences leaned from the weight of ice they had carried too long, and the creek swelled with meltwater, brown and mean. Work doubled. So did the silence. Clara had learned the land by then, the stubborn parts, the places the wind never left, the corner of the barn where the wood had gone soft from old rain. Her body moved without thinking now. Saddle cinched in a single pull. Rope thrown clean. Fire stoked with one match. Eli said less these days, and not because there was nothing to say. She could feel something held back in him, tight in the jaw, in the way he avoided her eyes. He rode out early. Stayed out late. When she asked if something was wrong with the herd, he only said some fences need mending. She didn't press. But at night, lying awake in the bunkhouse, the quiet felt different. Not peace, but distance. The children had grown louder in the house. Laughter came easier. Her youngest had taken to calling Eli Mr. Cowboy and clung to his leg whenever he could. Clara saw the way Eli bent, always gentle, always a little surprised by it. Like he didn't know what to do with small hands or trust, but he never pushed them away. Then came the letter. It arrived by a rider from town, sealed in a thick folded square, addressed to Eli Whitley, ranch west of Rook Hollow. Eli didn't open it right away. Just held it in his hand, staring at the crease like it might vanish if he waited long enough. Clara saw him reading it the next morning, standing at the edge of the corral. His face didn't change, just went quiet in a way that made her stomach pull tight. That evening he didn't come by. 3 days passed. On the 4th, She found him in the workshop, hunched over the table, a pencil in his hand, wood shavings scattered across the floor. "You need something mended?" she asked. He shook his head. "No." She waited. He set the pencil down. "That letter was from my sister." Clara said nothing. "She's selling the land. The part back east where our folks are buried. Says it's time. Says I should come home. Will you?" He didn't look at her. "I don't know. I ain't been back in 12 years. Don't even know who I'd be if I did." Silence sat between them, thick as dust. Then he looked at her. "Really look. She says I ought to start a family. Settle down. Get something right before it's too late." Clara felt her chest fall. "You think she's wrong?" "I don't know what right looks like anymore." They stood there, nothing between them but a rough pine table and everything neither of them could say. At last he spoke again. "I never asked what you want." She blinked. The question caught her off guard. "What I want?" He nodded. She opened her mouth, closed it. "I wanted to keep my children fed," she said finally. "I wanted to work and not be sent away. I wanted, I don't know, to breathe again, without feeling guilty for it." He took a step toward her. "And now?" She met his eyes. "I want to stay, if staying's still an option." He didn't smile, but his shoulders dropped, like something had been lifted. Then came a knock at the door. They both turned. Clara opened it. A man stood there. Clean coat, tall boots, too polished for this land. "You Clara Monroe?" he asked. She nodded, slow. "I'm with the estate office out of Abilene. I'm here about a land claim. Your husband owed debt. There's been a dispute filed." Eli stepped forward. "What kind of dispute?" The man didn't flinch. "She has no legal claim to the house. Not even the one that burned. No inheritance. The children ain't named in any will. I'm afraid she's got no rights to any property, nor to work without a permit. We'll need to verify her employment and residency before the end of the week." Clara's blood ran cold. Eli's jaw clenched. "She works for me. She lives here." "For how long?" Eli looked at Clara. She looked at the floor. "Too long for it to be simple. Not long enough for it to be safe." The man tipped his hat. "I'll be back with papers. Hope it's all in order." He left. The wind had returned. Hard, cold, relentless. Eli didn't speak. Clara didn't either. But the truth had found them now, and something would have to be done. The wind clawed through the cracks that night. Clara sat by the stove, her oldest curled beside her, asleep, with his mouth half open, one arm slung across her lap. The bunkhouse felt too small all of a sudden. Too fragile. Like one sharp knock could send it all splintering down. Eli hadn't come by. She hadn't expected him to. She stared at the fire, watched the logs break and crumble, turning to coal and ash. There was a time she believed things only ever broke once. That grief came, split your world in two, and then left you alone to gather what pieces you could. But now she understood some things broke again and again, smaller each time, until there was nothing left to patch. In the morning she went to the barn before the sun had crested the ridge. Found Ellie there already, saddling his horse, jaw set. "You going somewhere?" He didn't look at her. "Rook Hollow. Lawyer's office. I'll get it sorted." "What if you can't?" He cinched the saddle tight, gave the horse a slap on the neck. "I will." She folded her arms. "Don't lie to me, Eli." He stopped, turned to face her, eyes tired but burning. "I ain't letting them take you from here. That man said you don't belong anywhere. I say different." She stepped closer, boots crunching over old straw. "I can't be a burden," she said. "I won't let my children grow up knowing they cost someone else their peace." His voice was low. "They've brought more peace than I've known in 10 years." She felt her throat tighten. The barn was warm from the horses, from the sun barely peeking through the slats. But her hands were cold. He looked at her then, really looked. "I don't know what I'm doing most days. But I know this land, and I know you've worked it with more grit than men who grew up on it. And I know your children laugh in my house like they've always belonged there." She could barely breathe. "If it comes to it," he said, "I'll make it legal. Put your name down. Give you a stake in the land. Whatever they need to see." Her eyes widened. "You'd marry me just to keep the law off my back?" "I'd marry you," he said, quiet now, "because I want to. Been wanting to. Long before that man ever knocked on the door." She stared at him. "Not because I pity you. Not because of the children. Because when I look at you, I see something I thought I'd buried with my brother. Something worth staying alive for." The air in the barn held still, like even the dust had stopped moving. She stepped closer. "You say all that like it's easy?" He shook his head. "No. I say it like it's true." Outside, a hawk cried. The world didn't pause. But something inside her did. "I've still got grief in me," she said. "Still got pieces that don't fit right." "So do I." She looked down at her hands, calloused, cracked, raw from cold and rope and sorrow. Then back at him. "All right," she said. Eli's mouth twitched, just a flicker of something soft and real. He reached out slow, touched her hand like he wasn't sure if he was allowed. She didn't pull away. That afternoon he rode to town. Filed papers. Told the law what needed telling. By the week's end she had a piece of paper with her name on it. It wasn't grand, just ink on parchment, but it meant something. The children moved into the house with their quilts and wooden toys and clumsy joy. Clara moved in after them, slow and cautious, like stepping onto a frozen river. But it held. They shared meals at one table now, laughed over burned biscuits, took turns checking the fence line. Some nights when the wind settled and the fire burned low, she would catch Eli watching her, like he still wasn't sure she was real, like he still couldn't believe something had come back to life in him. And she would reach across the table, set her hand over his, and say nothing. Because some things don't need words. Spring came slow. The land unfurled itself in cautious shades of green, as if afraid to trust the warmth. Shoots pushed up through the thawed earth, thin as thread. The creek, once swollen and angry, settled into steady murmur. Birds returned, sparrows first, then mourning doves calling out across the hills in that low, lonesome way that filled the silences between chores. Clara planted a garden behind the house. It wasn't much, a few rows of potatoes, cabbage, some onions she'd brought in a tin from Kansas, but her hands knew the work and the soil for all its stingy pride yielded to her. Eli built her a fence around it. Didn't ask. Just started hammering one morning, shirt sleeves rolled jaw tight in that quiet, determined way of his. The children watched from the porch, passing him nails, squinting up at the sun, like they couldn't remember a time it hadn't shone on them. Some nights they sat under the cottonwood tree out front, lantern flickering between them, the boys curled up with a blanket, and the girl resting her head on Clara's leg. Eli smoked his pipe. Clara shelled beans. It was the kind of silence that felt earned. And yet, not everything rested easy. One Sunday, a black carriage rolled up the hill. Eli saw it first. He set down his coffee, wiped his hands, and stood with his shoulders squared like a man walking into rain. The woman who stepped out wore gray, not black, and her hair was pinned high with steel precision. She looked Clara over before even greeting Eli. "Didn't believe the letter," she said. "Had to see it myself." "Sylvie," Eli said flat. "You've taken in a widow," she said. "With children." "I've married her," he replied. "If that's what you came to ask." Clara stood behind the screen door, still as the shadow she cast. The woman Sylvie folded her arms. I came to say the land back east is sold. Final. I'm taking the money, what little there is, and settling outside Chicago. Ellie nodded. Then I hope it gives you something you need. I needed you to come home. I am home. The silence between them was thick. Sylvie glanced at the children, at the garden, the dust on Clara's hem. Her eyes softened just a fraction. She makes you less bitter, she said. I suppose that's something. Then she turned to Clara. You'll do. But be warned, he keeps grief in his bones. I know, Clara said, her voice quiet but steady. So do I? Sylvie gave a tight nod, stepped back into the carriage, and was gone. Later that night, Ellie stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed. Sorry about her, he said. Clara joined him. You don't have to explain family to me. He smiled, then tired but true. Didn't think I could feel this again. Not after burying my brother. Not after watching the ranch rot with just me on it. She looked out across the fields, golden in the dying light. You didn't find something new, she said. You just stopped fighting what was left. He took her hand slow, like every movement mattered. You ever wish things had happened different? All the time, she said. But wishing doesn't grow crops. Doesn't keep children warm. The porch creaked beneath them. The sky turned violet, stars poking through like promises. I love you, he said, like it was the simplest truth in the world. She didn't cry, just leaned into him, cheek against his shoulder. I know. They stood like that until the moon rose. Inside, the children slept safe. Outside, the land waited. And for the first time in a long, long while, there was nothing to run from, only a place to stay. Summer settled in without asking. Heat came up from the ground in slow waves, thickening the air and drawing sweat from the back of the neck before first light. The hills browned at the edges, and the cattle stood long hours in the shade, flicking their tails and breathing slow. Storms rolled in from the west some evenings, all wind and dust, and no rain, just enough to rattle the windows and set the chickens restless. But the ranch held. So did they. Clara rose early, worked the garden until her hands were lined with dirt. Her youngest trailed behind her, now pulling weeds and asking questions in a voice that never tired. The others helped Eli with the stock-fed chickens, checked fence posts. What started as survival had become routine. What was once fear had hardened into steadiness. Eli had built a co-op from scrap wood pieced together by hand. He'd never been much for chickens, but Clara had said she missed the sound of them in the morning, and so he built one. Said nothing more about it, just handed her the hammer and helped her lift the roof into place. They spoke less of the past now. Some of it had faded, some still sat between them like a rock in the river, unmoving but no longer blocking the current. They slept in the same bed, held each other in the early hours when the heat broke and the breeze came back. Some nights he woke gasping from dreams he wouldn't speak aloud. She didn't ask, just reached for him, her hand over his chest, steadying his breath until it slowed. One afternoon she caught him sketching by the barn, charcoal on paper, rough lines of hills and sky. She watched from the fence, saying nothing. Later he left the page on the table, the garden, the house, her youngest asleep beneath the cottonwood tree. Her name in the corner, small and careful. She kept it in the kitchen drawer. That same week a man came up the trail, dust-covered, lean as bone, wearing a badge clipped to his vest. He introduced himself as a claims officer, said he was following up on land disputes from the winter. Clara stood on the porch while he read from a ledger, lips pressed thin. You filed quick, he said. Marriage certificate, transfer of title, letters from the county. Everything's in order. Ellie nodded once. The officer closed the book. Folk don't usually get their business tied up this clean. Makes me think you had reason. I did, Eli said. The man looked between them. You'll get questions, you know. Some folks don't like seeing widows land on their feet so fast. Think it means something got taken unfair. Clara's voice was calm. Let them come ask." The man tipped his hat. "You're a smart woman." "No," she said, "just tired of being afraid." He left without shaking hands. That night, Clara stood in the doorway of the children's room, watched them sleep tangled in quilts, the windows open to the night air. Outside, Eli split firewood by lantern light. His shirt clung to his back, every motion slow and certain. She stepped out barefoot, the grass cool under her feet. He paused when he saw her wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "You think this'll last?" she asked. He leaned the axe against the stump. "I think things fall apart when we stop tending them." She crossed the yard to him. "Then we won't stop." He reached for her hand. "You still carry the past with you." "Every day," she said. "But it doesn't carry me." He pulled her in, rested his forehead against hers. The lanterns swayed in the wind, casting long shadows behind them, and in that quiet space, surrounded by the bones of work and the breath of summer, two people stood together, not whole but healing. Not saved but chosen. By August, the heat was a living thing. It pressed down on the land like a hand on the back of your neck, constant, heavy, and without mercy. The grass turned brittle, snapping underfoot. Even the cattle grew mean in the afternoons, their lowing, sharper eyes rimmed red from dust. There was no wind. The sky stayed white for days at a time, and the flies came in thick clouds, sticking to everything that sweat. Clara learned to wake before it. She had the fire going and coffee boiling before the sun breached the hills. She moved quiet through the kitchen, barefoot, the floor cool against her feet. The children still slept tangled together on the parlor floor, some nights where it was cooler. Eli often rose before her, but not today. He came in late from the west fence, shirt soaked through, face drawn. Something was wrong in him, though he said little of it. Just that the post near the arroyo had come down and the cattle had wandered too far again. She watched him that morning, his shoulders bowed, hands slow around the coffee tin. "Your leg bothering you again?" she asked. He shook his head, then winced. "Only when I stand, or walk, or breathe." She smiled. "So not much then?" He chuckled, and for a moment the weight in the room lifted. But it came back when he slid the ledger across the table. "We're short," he said. "Feed, mostly. And the well's going to need new boards by October. Roof, too, before the snow." She turned the pages. Numbers scrawled in his neat, patient hand. Ink faded from the sun, but clear enough to read. She bit her lip. "We'll manage," she said. He watched her, quiet. "You always say that," he said. "Because it's always true." He reached across the table, laid his calloused hand over hers. "I won't let it go under," he said. "I know." But worry sat behind his eyes like a storm on the ridge, too far to touch, but coming all the same. That afternoon she walked to the edge of the land where the dry creek beds split into stone. She sat on the old stump where Eli said he'd first seen her arrive, just a shape in the wind with 3 children and no future. The memory of it lived in the dust here, in the silence. She thought of all the days between then and now. The slow building of trust, of work done not for praise but survival, of mornings shared and nights endured, of Eli's voice, low in the dark, speaking not of dreams but of duty. Clara had once believed in safety, in the kind that came from men and paper and promises, but she knew better now. Safety was hands in the dirt, a fence that held, a child's laughter through an open window. It was standing beside someone when neither of you had anything left to trade but your name. When she came back to the house, Eli was sitting with her oldest, teaching him how to whittle without slicing through his thumb. The boy listened hard, nodding like each word mattered. She watched them a long while before stepping inside. That night, as the sun bled out across the hills, they sat on the porch together. The air was thick with heat, but the sky had softened to a kind of gold that made everything seem kinder than it was. "I've been thinking," Eli said. "Dangerous," Clara murmured, sipping her coffee. He ignored her. This ranch'll need more than just work to last. She looked at him. He nodded toward the fields. Needs people. Community. Someone to pass it to. She raised an eyebrow. You planning to leave it already? No, he said. I'm planning to give it roots. She understood. Not just the words. The weight behind them. This wasn't about ownership. It was about belonging. He looked at her, and for the first time there was no hesitation in it. I want you to help me build it. All of it. She reached for his hand. We already are. The light faded. The land held its breath, and the house behind them, patched and warm, stood firm against the coming night. Autumn rode in on the back of the wind. It came first as a whisper cooler mornings, the sharp smell of dying grass leaves curling in on themselves before they ever turned gold. Then came the sky's sudden and clean blue as glass. The hills turned amber, the cattle thicker with their winter coats, and the children dug out the blankets they'd forgotten they had. The ranch quieted in its own way. Not still, but settled. Work shifted from planting and mending to stacking, storing, preparing. Clara moved through it with a rhythm now no longer surviving each day but building something steady inside of it. She wore a scarf around her neck and gloves with patched palms. Her hands were scarred and strong. Eli watched her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. He'd never been good with words, not the ones that mattered. But he showed her in the way he remembered how she took her coffee, in the way he let her daughter braid his hair while pretending to be half annoyed, in the way he'd stay out late chopping wood without being asked. They spoke less of the future now, not because it frightened them, but because they were already living in it. One morning, just past first frost, Clara stood at the stove frying bread in the pan when Eli stepped in, cheeks red from the cold. He paused in the doorway, looked at her in a way that made her turn. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded once, then cleared his throat. "I stopped by the notary yesterday," he said. "Signed over half the land." She stared. "You did what?" "It's yours now. Legal. Not just the house. The fields. The water rights. All of it. Easy. I should done it sooner. But part of me," he exhaled, "part of me didn't know if I could really let it go." She crossed the room slow. "And now, I'm not letting go," he said. "I'm giving it to you. That's different." She didn't speak, just rested her hand against his chest, felt the heartbeat beneath it steady and sure. "I didn't need it," she said. "I know," he replied. "That's why you deserved it." That afternoon they walked the land together. The children ran ahead, chasing each other through the brittle grass, their shouts bright against the quiet sky. Eli and Clara moved at their own pace, shoulders brushing. The sun lit the hills, casting long shadows that bent and stretched but never broke. Near the back ridge where the wind always cut hardest, Ellie stopped. "This is where I'll build the new barn," he said. She looked out. "It'll take time." "We've got time." They stood there a long while, watching the light shift over the land. He turned to her. "You still carry your grief?" "Yes," she said, "but it's quieter now." He nodded. "So's mine." They walked back slow, the smell of smoke and stew hanging in the air as the sun slipped down. The house stood ahead, lights glowing from its windows, smoke rising from the chimney like a signal, a place with warmth, a place to come home to. That night, as they settled around the table, laughter rose like steam from the bowls. The children passed bread, spilled milk, argued over who would feed the chickens in the morning. And Eli reached for Clara's hand beneath the table, squeezed it once. Firm. Certain. She squeezed back. There was no grand vow. No church bell. No paper that could bind them tighter than the work, the dirt, the love built in ordinary days. But in that moment, with firelight flickering against the walls and voices full of life, they both knew. This was the promise. and it had already been kept. Subscribe and carry the story further down the road.